January 12, 1943, Krakow, Poland. The dental office on Marsakowska Street lay wrapped in a dense, almost sacred silence when General Karl Weiss crossed the threshold without announcing himself. He came without an escort, carried no visible weapon, only that perfectly pressed gray coat and the brutal certainty of men who have never asked permission to take what they want. Elena Hartmann looked up from the instruments she was disinfecting. Her hands stayed steady. Her face gave nothing away. In the last 18 months of meticulously administered terror, she had learned that survival did not require courage, but complete erasure. "Open your mouth," she said in flawless German, with the clinical neutrality of a phrase repeated by sheer inertia. Weiss obeyed without really looking at her. To him, Elena was just another tool, an efficient, discreet cog in the machinery of occupation, useful but disposable, precisely the kind of presence the powerful stop noticing. On the second visit, Elena adjusted the surgical lamp. The light fell on the cracked molar in the lower right jaw of the general. She took the mirror in her left hand and the explorer in her right, measuring every movement with millimetric precision, regulating her breathing so as not to betray the accelerated pulse pounding in her chest. Outside, the distant echo of boots on frozen pavement was a reminder that Krakow did not forgive mistakes, that every second was a wager against death. Weiss spoke with his mouth open, his words distorted by metal. He complained about the cold Polish winter, about a war dragging on along the Eastern Front, about Poles incapable of appreciating German generosity. Elena nodded in silence, as always. She did not opine, did not react. She did not exist beyond her expert hands and her professional voice. On the metal tray, a small gold capsule waited, gleaming with that luster that suggests purity and perfection. No one, not even the most suspicious military doctors, would have noticed any difference between that filling and the hundreds Elena had placed in German mouths since the occupation began. But there was one. A difference measured in milligrams, invisible and lethal. She thought of Daniel Hartmann, of the last letter that never arrived after the trains departed east in March 1942, of the name she stopped pronouncing because words have weight and the dead do not answer when you call them. She also thought of what she had learned at the University of Warsaw before they decided that Jewish women did not deserve to know how to heal. "You're going to feel some pressure," she warned in that neutral voice she had turned into armor. It was not a lie, only an incomplete truth. She placed the filling with a surgeon's precision, pressed, shaped, and sealed the gold until it fused with the natural tooth, polishing the surface until it returned the light like a mirror. Weiss tested his bite, moved his jaw, ran his tongue over the fresh work, and smiled, satisfied. "Excellent work, Anna Lewicka," he said, using the false name Elena wore like a porcelain mask. He paid without protest, offered that superficial courtesy conquerors reserve for useful conquered people, adjusted his coat, and stepped out into the snowy streets of Krakow carrying death with him without knowing it, sealed in gold and dissolving slowly. 3 milligrams of arsenic trioxide that would begin seeping into his bloodstream about 48 hours later. Elena cleaned the instruments meticulously, washed her hands 3 times as if she could erase what she had just done, and closed the drawer of special fillings, identical to the normal ones, separated only by a microscopic mark only she recognized. 10 minutes later, Pyotr Novak came in through the back door of the office. He immediately noticed that Elena was paler than usual and that her hands, always steady, trembled slightly as she put the instruments away. "Everything okay?" he asked in Polish, lowering his voice even though they were alone. Elena nodded without looking at him. "Weiss," she said. and nothing more was needed. Pyotr Novak closed his eyes for a second and understood without any explanation being necessary. Karl Weiss was not just another name within the occupation structure. He was the officer in charge of deportations from the Wola district, the man whose signature appeared on orders for the summary execution of Polish civilians, the architect of the final liquidation of the ghetto only months earlier. "How long?" Pyotr asked. "Between 4 and 6 weeks, depending on his metabolism." "And if they discover it?" Elena Hartmann finally raised her gaze. Her eyes, steel gray, inherited from her father, showed no fear, only a disturbing clarity. "Then it will have been worth it," she said, "because that would be the most dangerous outcome of all." Nothing had gone wrong. The procedure had been flawless. Weiss had walked away satisfied and confident, unaware that the clock of his life had just begun an irreversible countdown, and no one, absolutely no one, suspected a thing. If this story reached your heart, support it with a like and subscribe so you don't miss future videos. If you'd like to become a channel member and help us continue sharing these forgotten stories, click the join button. And if this video moved you, press the thanks button to help the channel grow. Tell me in the comments which city and country you're watching from. I want to know from where you stand with those whom history tried to silence. Krakow, in the winter of 1943, was a city that had forgotten what it meant to breathe without fear. Nazi occupation had turned it into a labyrinth of terror where every corner could be a sentence, every forged document a wager against the machinery of the Gestapo, and even walking with your back too straight could be read as defiance, and paid for with a bullet to the back of the neck. The streets were riddled with German checkpoints, soldiers with dogs, and posters announcing public executions of alleged Polish terrorists. On the walls, stains of blood from morning firing squads still lingered, repeated every few days whenever the Gestapo felt the need to remind everyone who was in charge. Curfew began at 8 in the evening. After that hour, anyone on the street could be shot without warning. The sound of boots patrolling empty avenues echoed like the heartbeat of a mechanical beast that never slept. Food was rationed. Coupons allowed barely 300 grams of bread per person per week, less than 50 a day, enough to stay alive, not to live. The black market thrived in dark alleys, where family jewelry was traded for rotten potatoes. The Jewish ghetto, which had once imprisoned hundreds of thousands of people crammed into a few square kilometers, had been liquidated months earlier. Survivors were sent to Treblinka in cattle cars that departed every morning from the Umschlagplatz, thousands a day, wagons designed for 40 bodies filled with more than twice that number. When the wind blew from the east, the smell of death traveled from the freight station into the city center. Those who remained were exterminated during the uprising, when the resistance chose to die fighting rather than in gas chambers. The SS burned the ghetto building by building, bunker by bunker, until only smoking rubble remained and a stench of burned flesh that lingered for weeks. By January 1943, a few still remained hidden, invisible, living under false identities among the Polish population, paying fortunes for documents that transformed them, at least on paper, from condemned Jews into ordinary Poles, complete with invented biographies and forged genealogies. Elena Hartmann was one of those shadows. Officially, she had ceased to exist on July 22, 1942, when the mass deportations began. Her death certificate, falsified with the help of a Polish official who still believed decency might survive amid barbarism, stated that she had died of typhus in a hospital inside the ghetto. A death so ordinary, so perfectly suited to a statistic, that it aroused not the slightest suspicion. In its place appeared Kristina Kowalska, Catholic, single, 32 years old, daughter of a Krakow dentist who had died in 1939 during the German bombings. Educated at home by her father, she had inherited both the dental practice and the prestige attached to his name, and the documents supporting it were impeccable. The parish registry of her baptism in 1911 was written in aged ink that seemed to have been there for decades, and the family photographs showed a blonde girl who could have been anyone. The price of that identity had been everything Elena Hartman owned: inherited jewelry, savings accumulated over years, even the engagement ring Daniel Hartman had given her in 1938, when the world still seemed like a place where Jews could imagine a future. But Elena did not think about the cost. She thought about the opportunity, because Kristina Kowalska was not just a false identity. She was a weapon, a presence so perfectly harmless that the Germans sought her out and needed her. The Wehrmacht's military dentists were often butchers without finesse, capable of pulling teeth with pliers and treating anesthesia as a superfluous luxury. Officers who could afford to be selective preferred well-trained civilian dentists, careful professionals who worked without inflicting unnecessary pain. That reputation was one Elena built patiently. In August 1942, barely a month after Elena Hartman officially died, she presented herself at the German registration offices, offered her services, demonstrated her skill, and spoke flawless German. Learned over years of study when Germany was still seen as the cradle of modern science, not an empire of death, she was accepted without hesitation. A useful Pole, a qualified professional, exactly the kind of collaborator needed to keep the occupation's infrastructure running. For the first 6 months, she worked impeccably, limiting herself to legitimate practice. She filled cavities, extracted infected teeth, placed crowns and bridges, and consolidated her reputation as an exceptional dentist. Patient, meticulous, reliable. But at night, alone in the small apartment above the practice, she studied chemistry, especially the chemistry of dental materials and the way the human body processes toxins. Gold amalgams were not pure gold, but alloys of gold or silver with copper and other metals, designed to withstand chewing and last decades inside a mouth. Their composition could vary within certain limits. A skilled dentist could adjust the formula, introduce trace elements, play with proportions, and if she also had access to certain substances available in 1940s Poland for industrial and agricultural use, she could create a filling that looked perfect, felt perfect, and passed any visual inspection, but was in reality a slow-release capsule of poison. Arsenic trioxide, a white powder used as a pesticide and rat poison, was not difficult to obtain if you knew whom to approach and how much to pay. Mixed in microscopic quantities within a gold alloy and sealed inside a tooth, it would dissolve little by little as saliva and digestive acids slowly degraded the metal matrix. The victim would ingest minimal doses each day, insufficient to cause immediate symptoms or raise alarms, but enough to accumulate in the liver, kidneys, and heart, precisely enough to kill over time. Elena spent 3 months perfecting the technique, calculating exact proportions and testing on laboratory rats that Piotr Nowak obtained from the German veterinary hospital, where he worked cleaning floors and emptying trash, because no one watched the Pole assigned to that job. He collected refuse, and no one noticed when a laboratory rat disappeared from its cage. The first one died on the 11th day. Too fast. Elena cut the dose in half. The second lasted 22 days, but symptoms appeared as early as day 7. Hair loss, obvious tremors. Any physician would have suspected something. It was too visible, so she adjusted again. She lowered the concentration and, at the same time, increased the surface area of contact by altering the crystalline structure of the alloy, allowing for a slower, more uniform release. No spikes, far harder to detect in routine blood tests. The third rat lived 34 days. Symptoms did not begin until day 23. Progressive fatigue, loss of appetite, organ failure that looked natural, as if the animal were simply fading away. Perfect. Elena documented everything meticulously in a notebook she kept hidden in a cavity beneath the floor of her apartment. Every trial, every dose, every result. Not because she expected anyone to read it, but because she was a scientist, and scientists record. The arsenic trioxide she used came from the black market. Piotr Nowak had contacted a Polish chemist who, before the war, had worked in a pesticide factory. The man asked no questions. He produced what was requested and charged in gold. Elena paid him with the last ring she had kept from her grandmother. 3 grams of pure arsenic cost her everything she had, but it was enough for 60 lethal doses if mixed correctly, 60 chances to make the conquerors pay. The first time she used it on a human being was in November 1942. Hans Kruger walked into the office complaining of a toothache that wouldn't let him sleep. He was 53, his face flushed like that of a man who drank too much, his gaze cold from having signed too many deaths. He commanded an auxiliary police unit responsible for public executions of Polish partisans. His men hung civilians from telegraph poles and left the bodies to rot for days. Elena treated the infected molar, did impeccable work, and sealed, along with the gold, 3 milligrams of death. Kruger died 6 weeks later. The death certificate cited acute liver failure. Military doctors speculated about hepatitis, alcohol, the stress of war. It never occurred to them to examine his teeth. The second was Major Ernst Baer in December, an officer in logistics tasked with coordinating the transport of Jews from Polish ghettos to extermination camps, a bureaucrat of death who signed deportations over breakfast. Elena treated him for a broken crown and placed a temporary filling with 4 milligrams of arsenic. In January, he was still alive, but she knew his time was running out and that the symptoms had already begun. Unexplained exhaustion, stomach pains, mental confusion. Soon the terminal phase would arrive, and now Karl Weiss, the third and the most dangerous. Not just any officer, but a general with resources, personal physicians, and access to the best hospitals in the Reich. If anything went wrong, if the signs appeared too quickly or too clearly, there would be investigations, autopsies, toxicological analyses. Elena knew this and did it anyway. Because every time she closed her eyes, she saw the photographs Piotr had shown her. Bodies piled in the streets of the ghetto. Children dying of hunger. Families shoved into cattle cars. While Weiss watched from his official car, smoking with indifference. And she thought of Daniel Hartmann, of his voice reading poetry to her at night before the world broke, of his hands, so much like her own, made to heal, not to kill. She thought of the last embrace before the soldiers took him away, of the promise she made, to find a way to survive, to resist. This too was resistance, silent, invisible, almost impossible to stop. Every poisoned filling she placed became a sentence the Germans carried with them without knowing it, into their offices, their homes, their beds. Each one was a time bomb ticking inside their mouths as they ate, spoke, or slept, and no one knew, no one suspected. That was the most terrible power of all. In February 1943, Dr. Walter Newman began to notice a pattern. chief physician of the German military hospital in Krakow. 58 years old, born in Berlin and trained at the University of Heidelberg when German medicine still meant excellence, he had served as a field surgeon on the Western Front during the First World War. He had seen enough death to develop a particular instinct for when something did not fit, and here, something clearly did not. 3 high-ranking officers had died over the past 4 months with similar symptoms: progressive fatigue, gastrointestinal pain, mental confusion, and multiple organ failure in men who, according to their records, had been reasonably healthy before everything began abruptly. Oberst Krüger was the first. At first he was diagnosed with hepatitis, but the tests showed none of the typical markers of a viral infection, and he died before they could investigate further. The second was Major Baer. His symptoms progressed more slowly, allowing for closer observation. Tests revealed increasing liver and kidney damage with no clear cause. Cancer was considered, but X-rays showed no tumors, and he died in his bed, delirious about rats and white powder. Now General Karl Weiss was beginning to present the same clinical picture. Neumann ordered a full battery of tests, consulted specialists in Berlin, and personally reviewed the diet, environment, and habits of all 3 officers in search of a common factor. He found nothing obvious, except for one striking detail. All 3 had received dental treatment in the months preceding the onset of symptoms. All 3 had gone to civilian dentists rather than military dental services. And when he reviewed the records more closely, he discovered that 2 of them had been treated by the same professional, Christina Kowalska. Neumann was not a man prone to conspiracies. The war had taught him that sometimes people simply die without clear explanations, that the human body is fragile and complex, that coincidences exist. But he also knew that ignoring patterns was a fast way to end up dead. On February 15, 1943, he ordered a discreet investigation. He did not yet notify the Gestapo. He did not want to provoke panic. He wanted data. He sent a young medical officer to ask questions, review files, and construct a precise timeline of who had been treated, when, and what procedures had been performed. 3 days later, the results arrived. Krüger had received a gold filling in the lower left first molar on November 3, 1942, treatment performed by Christina Kowalska. Symptoms began on December 18th, and he died on the 27th. Major Baer received a gold filling in the upper right second premolar on December 8, 1942, also from the hands of Christina Kowalska. Symptoms appeared on January 15th, and death followed. On January 12, 1943, General Weiss received a gold filling in the lower right first molar, treatment performed by Christina Kowalska. Symptoms began on February 20th. The interval between treatment and the onset of symptoms repeated itself with disturbing regularity, roughly 5 to 6 weeks. Neumann stared at the numbers for a long time and finally gave another order: that the body of Major Bauer be exhumed from the military cemetery and brought back. He wanted a full autopsy with an exhaustive toxicology screen. Not just common poisons, but heavy metals as well. Everything. The results arrived on February 25th. Arsenic in hepatic tissue, 23 parts per million, more than 20 times above normal. Chronic arsenic poisoning, with no room for doubt. Neumann closed the report, removed his glasses, and rubbed his eyes in exhaustion. Then he called the Gestapo, because this was no longer medicine, it was Reich security. There was a killer in Krakow, and he was murdering German officers in the most silent, intimate, and difficult-to-detect way Neumann had seen in 40 years of practice. Elena realized something had changed when SS Sturmbannführer Rudolf Stein entered her office on February 28, 1943. Stein was not a patient. He did not ask for an appointment. did not need dental care. He simply appeared, escorted by two Gestapo agents in black leather coats, and closed the door behind them with a slam that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. "Anna Lewicka," he said, with a smile that never reached his eyes. "We need to talk about your patients." Elena kept her face neutral. Her hands did not tremble as she arranged the instruments on the metal tray, gesture by gesture, as if every second she bought was air to think. "Of course," she replied in perfect German. "Is there a problem with any treatment?" "That's exactly what we're trying to find out." Stein advanced slowly. He was around 40, thin, with a face that seemed made for cruelty. He had spent 3 years interrogating the Polish resistance. He knew how to read people, to hunt fear, to smell a lie in a break of the voice. "Major Bauer," he said. "Do you remember him?" "Yes. He came in December. Broken crown on the upper premolar." "What treatment did you perform?" "A temporary filling. I recommended a permanent crown, but he said he would decide later." "You used gold?" "Yes, gold amalgam, standard procedure." Stein nodded calmly, took a small notebook from his coat, opened it, and read aloud. "Major Bauer died on February 6th, arsenic poisoning. Do you have arsenic in your office, madam?" The floor tilted beneath Elena's feet, but outwardly nothing changed. She had rehearsed this moment hundreds of times. She knew it would come sooner or later, and she had decided that if they caught her, she would not beg or break. She would go standing, like Daniel Hartmann, with dignity. She answered firmly, "Arsenic has no use in modern dentistry. Why would I have it?" "That is an excellent question." Stein walked around the office, touching things with his black leather gloves. The dental equipment, jars of materials, instruments hanging on the wall. "We also have the case of Kruger, dead in December. Similar symptoms. You treated him as well, correct?" "Yes. An infection in a molar. I cleaned the cavity and then placed a filling. Another gold one." "Yes." "What an interesting coincidence." Stein stopped in front of her and looked her straight in the eyes. Elena met his gaze without blinking. "General Karl Weiss is also your patient," he continued. "You treated him 6 weeks ago, and now he is very ill. The doctors don't know if he will survive. Would you like to say anything about that?" "Only that I hope he recovers soon. He is an excellent patient." "Do you know what we do to people who murder Germans, Anna Lewicka?" The words fell like a hammer, but Elena had already passed the point where fear mattered. "I am a dentist," she said simply. "No, a murderer." Stein smiled again, that terrible smile. "We're going to find out. My men will search your office, take all your materials for analysis, and you will come with us to answer some more detailed questions." Elena looked at him without moving. "Am I under arrest?" "Let's say you're being detained for questioning." That was enough. The Gestapo agents began dismantling the office with cold, methodical efficiency. They emptied drawers one by one, examined every instrument, every bottle, every scrap of paper. Dental materials were packed into wooden crates, stamped with official Reich seals. Samples were taken of every amalgam, every filling, every chemical substance Elena owned. One of the agents, a young man with acne along his neck, triumphantly lifted a bottle of nitric acid used to clean instruments. "Sturmbannführer, acid." Stein looked at him with contempt. "Cleaning acid, you idiot. Every dentist has it. Keep looking." The agent, embarrassed, put the bottle back. Elena watched everything with outward calm. Inside, her mind was calculating probabilities. The 3 poisoned capsules were mixed among 50 others, with no visible marks, no appreciable difference in weight. Only that microscopic notch on the edge, detectable by touch alone, that only her trained fingers could recognize. If the Germans chemically analyzed all of them, they would find the poison, without question. But a full analysis of 53 samples would take time. Days, perhaps a week. What would happen then? Could Piotr Novak do anything? Would the resistance react? Or would she wait in a Gestapo cell until the verdict arrived? They found the 53 gold capsules in the lower right drawer of the cabinet, arranged in perfect rows, each resting in its own black velvet compartment, gleaming under the light like promises of healing. The lead agent counted them carefully, placed them in a special cotton-lined box, and sealed it with red wax and Stein's signature. "These go straight to the central laboratory," he said. "If anything is wrong with even one of them, we'll know." Elena knew the marked capsules would betray nothing at first glance. The agents were looking for visible differences, not tactile ones, and they found none. So everything was packed up. Capsules, bottles, instruments. The crates were loaded and sent to the Gestapo's central laboratory on Sucha Avenue for full analysis. Elena calculated that she had about 48 hours before the results came back. 48 hours before the 3 poisoned capsules were identified. 48 hours before her false identity collapsed and revealed the Jewish woman hidden beneath it. After that would come torture. Questions about accomplices, contacts, how many more she had poisoned. And when there was nothing left to extract, they would hang her in a public square as a warning. Elena accepted all of this as they handcuffed her, as they shoved her into the black car waiting outside, as the streets of Krakow blurred into gray streaks beyond the window. She accepted it because she had achieved something no one could take from her. She had killed 3 of them, generals and commanders, architects of death. She had killed them slowly, from the inside, by making them trust her, lower their guard, open their mouths, and allow her to place death inside their own bodies. And if she died for it, she would die knowing Daniel Hartmann would have been proud, knowing she had resisted in the only way possible, knowing she had not been invisible out of resignation, but because she had turned invisibility into a weapon. But something unexpected happened in the next 24 hours. Piotr Novak, who had followed the arrest from a nearby cafe, did not remain still. He activated contacts Elena did not even know existed, connections to Polish resistance cells operating in the shadows of Krakow. And those cells understood immediately that Elena was too valuable to lose, not for who she was, but for what she had done. The story of the dentist poisoning Germans with gold teeth was already spreading like fire through the underground network. A story powerful enough to lift morale, to prove that the Germans were not invincible, that even the most powerful could be reached. The resistance could not allow that story to end with Elena hanging in a public square, so they chose something desperate. On the night of March 1st, 1943, a 5-man commando attacked the vehicle transporting her from Gestapo headquarters to the interrogation facility. They used a homemade grenade to stop the car at a dark corner in the old city. In less than 30 seconds, the 2 guards were dead. They pulled Elena from the smoking wreckage and vanished into a web of alleyways and hidden passages known by heart only to those born there. By the time the Gestapo reacted and sent reinforcements, she was already 3 kilometers away, hidden in a cellar beneath an abandoned bakery, while a resistance doctor bandaged the bruises left by the blast. Why? Was all she managed to ask once she fully regained consciousness. The leader of the commando, a man in his early 30s with pockmarked scars across his face, gave a faint smile. Because you killed 3 of those bastards without firing a single shot. Because you proved to them that we can reach them even when they believe they're safe. Elena swallowed. But now they know my name, my face, my office. Anna Lewicka died tonight, he replied calmly. The Gestapo will never find her, because she never truly existed. They handed her new papers, yet another identity, no longer a dentist, but a textile factory worker in a working-class district, someone utterly ordinary, utterly invisible once again. And now what? Elena asked. The man looked at her with something like respect. Now you survive. The war isn't over, and when it ends, someone will have to tell what you did. Elena spent the rest of the occupation working in the textile factory under that third false identity. She never practiced dentistry again, never touched another dental instrument. She became just another shadow in a city made of shadows, but the effects of her work continued to surface for months. General Karl Weiss died on March 8, 1943, exactly 55 days after Elena sealed the poisoned filling into his mouth. Dr. Newman, frustrated by the disappearance of his main suspect, ordered a full autopsy. They found arsenic levels even higher than in Major Burr's case, and analysis of the filling confirmed it contained about 3 milligrams of arsenic trioxide mixed into the gold alloy. The Gestapo launched a massive manhunt for Anna Lewicka. They interrogated neighbors, reviewed records, followed every imaginable lead, and found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Anna Lewicka had been a fiction from the beginning, a mask Elena put on and then discarded. Laboratory analysis of the 53 gold capsules confiscated from the office revealed that 3 contained arsenic, but by then it was impossible to determine which patients had received them. The records were meticulous about procedures, but did not specify which exact capsule was used in each case. The Gestapo closed the file in June 1943, classifying it as medical terrorism by an unknown perpetrator, probably killed during the escape. They ordered that all German officers receive dental care exclusively from military doctors. Polish civilians were forbidden from treating German personnel. The story dissolved into the chaos of war, except among those who remembered, among those who had been there and managed to survive. Elena survived the occupation. She survived the uprising of the summer of 1944, when the city rose up and was destroyed as punishment. She spent 63 days hidden in a cellar while everything burned above her head. When the Soviet army finally liberated the ruins in January 1945, she emerged pale, thin, almost unrecognizable. She was 36 years old, but looked 60. For 2 years after the war, she searched for Daniel Hartmann. She checked lists of camp survivors, spoke with refugee organizations, combed through archives and records, searching for his name again and again. It never appeared. Daniel Hartmann had been lost on the trains that went east in 1942 and never returned, like millions of others, like almost everyone. Elena never went back to dentistry. The mere idea of stepping into a dental office made her nauseous. In 1947, she moved to Watch and found work as a librarian at an elementary school. She lived quietly, never remarried, and never spoke about what she had done during the war, until 1961. That year, during the trial of Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem, when the world was once again forced to confront the crimes of the Holocaust, a Polish journalist investigating lesser-known stories of the resistance came across vague references in Gestapo archives to a dentist who had poisoned German officers. He followed the trail, spoke with survivors, and eventually found Pyotr Nowak, who had emigrated to Israel after the war. Pyotr told him about Elena, what she had done, and how they had gotten her out alive. The journalist found her in Watch. She was 52 and living alone in a small apartment filled with books. At first, she refused to speak. She said there was no story, that she had only done what anyone would have done. But the journalist persisted. He told her the world needed to know, that stories of resistance mattered, that young people had to understand there were those who fought back. In the end, Elena agreed. She gave a single interview. She spoke for 3 hours and told everything. The article was published in April 1961 and caused a stir, but she rejected any further attention. She refused medals and honors. When the Polish government tried to decorate her, she politely declined. When Jewish organizations wanted to honor her, she thanked them and did not attend. "I am not a heroine," she would say to anyone who asked. "I was just a woman who found a way to survive, and to make her existence matter when everything said it didn't." In her later years, she wrote a brief memoir and left instructions for it to be published after her death. In it, she explained that she did not regret what she had done, that each of the 3 men she killed had been responsible for hundreds, perhaps thousands of deaths, and that there was no moral equivalence between defending oneself and attacking. But she also wrote about the cost, about what it means to cross the line between healing and killing, about how, even when it was justified, even when it was necessary, something essential broke inside her and turned hands trained to ease pain into instruments of death. "The hands remember," she wrote. "Even decades later, when I close my eyes, I feel the texture of the gold, the pressure of sealing it into place. I see their trusting faces as they open their mouths. I know some will say they deserved to die, that the world is better without them, and they are right. But that does not change the fact that dying slowly, poisoned from within, is a terrible way to die, and that I was the one who caused it. I do not regret it, but I remember, and memory has its own weight." Elena Hartman died on November 14, 1973 in Watch, Poland. She was 64 years old. The cause was pancreatic cancer. She died in a hospital, cared for by young doctors who did not know who she had been or what she had done when the world was burning. She was buried in a Jewish cemetery under her real name, not the false name with which she killed, nor the survivor's identity she adopted afterward, but her true name, the one Daniel whispered in the dark, the one her parents gave her. On her gravestone, paid for by Piotr Nowak from Israel, there is a single line in Hebrew and Polish. She resisted with the only weapons she had. There are no details, no methods, just that simple sentence, because that is how she asked to be remembered. Not for how she did it, but for the choice she made. The choice was not to stop being invisible out of fear, but to use that invisibility as a tool, to turn the profession she loved into a weapon against those who had destroyed the world she knew. Today, more than 80 years later, the story of Elena Hartman remains one of the most extraordinary and unsettling to emerge from occupied Poland. Historians still debate the exact details. Some German archives confirm deaths by arsenic poisoning. Other documents were lost or destroyed during the retreat from Warsaw. What is not debated is that she existed and that it truly happened. A Jewish woman, hidden beneath false identities, found a way to kill 3 high-ranking Nazi officers using nothing but her professional training, her access, and a conscious decision to cross lines most people would never consider. She was not a soldier. She had no military training and no weapons, nothing beyond her knowledge of chemistry and a simple, brutal understanding. Conquerors, no matter how powerful they are, sooner or later need someone to ease their toothache. And that moment of vulnerability, When a general sits in a chair, mouth open, eyes closed, placing absolute trust in someone else's hands, is the only moment when the invincible can be touched. Elena understood that. She used it, and she paid the price for that understanding for the rest of her life. There is no easy heroism in this story, no clean victory. There is a woman who decided that if she was going to die anyway, and if her name was going to be erased regardless, then at least she would take some of them with her. And she did, 3 times, with perfect precision, with hands that did not tremble, and with gold that shone like a promise while hiding death. The story ended in silence, just as it began, in a dental office in Warsaw, with a woman who ceased to exist and men who never knew they were dying until it was already too late. And somewhere, in the silence that remains when all the witnesses are gone, in the space between what is said and what is remembered, Elena Hartman is still there, adjusting the lamp, preparing the instrument, sealing the gold, resisting. If you know someone from your city or country whose story deserves to be told, write it in the comments. Perhaps the next invisible hero will be yours.